Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in about 2 minutes, just giving some time for people to pop in.
Sure.
Welcome, everyone. We'll be getting started in just a minute. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are today. We're very happy that you joined us for this important discussion on the localization agenda and the role of national actors in humanitarian negotiation. I'm here today joined by a fantastic group of panelists. Esther Oman, the Executive Director of Reach Out Cameroon, Humayun Nasseri, former MSF staff in Afghanistan, and Stephanie Youssef, Deputy MENA Region Representative at the International Council of Voluntary Agencies. They will be speaking today on their experiences and expertise, and the panel will be moderated by Anaid Nahikian, and she is program manager here at Harvard Humanitarian Initiative in the Executive Negotiation Program. And I'm Luciana Wozniak, and I'm the program coordinator for the ENP program at HHI. So before I pass it on to Anaid, I just wanted to ask you all to please post your questions to the Q&A. We'll be reviewing all of the questions that you have throughout the time here together, and we'll try to address as many of them as possible at the end or throughout the presentation. And without further ado, I will pass it on to Anaid to get started on our panel.
Thank you, Luciana, and it's a real pleasure to be with everyone today. Thank you for joining the conversation. We're really delighted to have this group of experts here with us today. As Luciana mentioned, today we're speaking about a very important topic. As we all know, the ability of humanitarian organizations to access communities in need remains an ongoing challenge. And this is particularly the case in highly insecure and hard to reach areas. And on the other hand, while there have been a lot of policy and operational approaches to the concept of localization, I put that in quotes, of humanitarian action, there are many differences in the ways in which these approaches are implemented. There are a number of factors for this that surely the panel will touch on, including how humanitarian aid is financed, how and whether INGOs decide to engage with local organizations, the scope of partnerships, how meaningful and effective they are, direct allocation to resources. I mean, the list goes on and on. And so this discussion will seek to explore the factors in the humanitarian sector that drive how partnerships between local agencies and international agencies work together. And we'll also take a particular look at the ways in which local partnerships can support humanitarian access negotiations. So with that very brief introduction, and without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to our panelists first for a brief introduction before we open it up for some questions. So with that, Esther, I invite you to introduce yourself to the group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anaid. Thank you all for inviting us in this space to discuss issues as important as humanitarian response and localization. I am Jomo Esther Umam, the Executive Director of Reach Out Cameroon, a national NGO which is based in Buea. We all know that humanitarians, both those from the national and international NGOs, have been doing a lot to see that the pains and sufferings of those of our people who have been affected in one way or the other by the ongoing conflict are relieved. And my organization, Reach Out Cameroon, is one of those who pioneered humanitarian response in our region when all other civil society organizations were afraid to do so because of the dangers that loomed the air then. We have created so many inroads which have benefited not only our organizations, but other local and international non-governmental organizations, making it possible to reach those in need, though not as expected due to limited funding. Well, I know we are here today to discuss critical issues such as the need for effective localization of humanitarian response. But before we delve into that, I have two questions. But two questions which I usually ask myself and partners. But before I ask that, I will say that we've had so many partnerships within the context of our work as humanitarian organizations, both with UN systems and international non-governmental organizations in areas of health, food and nutrition, GBV, and protection, and economic empowerment, and others. And with this, I've been poised to ask some questions at times with regards to what we are here to talk about today. How come that we, the local NGOs engaged in humanitarian response, we've been given our all with the little means which we have, making sure that our doors are opened to international non-governmental organizations for support and guidance of local realities, but still we are being considered as not good enough to deliver. The second question I always ask myself is, why are international non-governmental organizations not bringing the capacities of the local one to their level for tomorrow's succession? I believe that we all here are going to get the answers with the discussions that we follow, especially given that we are here to look for new pathways and we are here to rethink humanitarian response. It is important that we look for new pathways of localization for better collaboration and partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Yes, some very important questions you posed that I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to discuss. Stephanie, I'll give the floor to you for your introduction, and then we'll move to Humayun.
Thank you very much. And I'm very delighted to be here with you all this evening from Amman, Jordan, on behalf of ICVA, which is one of the oldest networks consisting of over 140 local and international humanitarian actors, promoting principled and effective humanitarian action. So my name is Stephanie Youssef, and currently my role is a Deputy Regional Representative for ICVA in MENA. I actually focus on 8 countries throughout MENA, specifically OPT, the Occupied Palestinian Territories, Libya, Yemen, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. And through our work, we work closely with NGO networks, regional and in-country, national, international, mixed for us, and directly with international and national and civil society humanitarian actors to strengthen collective advocacy, strategic planning, good governance, and most importantly, meaningful participation. In ICVA, our focus areas include humanitarian coordination, forced migration, humanitarian financing, and adapting to change, which includes topics and thematic areas such as climate change, PSEA, localization, and nexus, where we actually have a permanent seat on all of the interagency standing committee task force related to them. When it comes to localization, I'm not going to go too much into it right now, but it is the center of all discussions and the catalyst to effective action. And honestly, although it's been brought up since way back when, but COVID-19 really did bring localization to a new light. It shed light on the successes and opportunities for improvement, and it brought it to the discussion of it to the center. Localization became one of the transformation areas in ICFA for our 2030 strategy, and where we talk about it in terms of being globally distributed and locally rooted. ICFA, we focus on supporting local actors through influencing the overall humanitarian architecture, sometimes the national architecture, and in order to create an enabling environment and inclusive humanitarian leadership. We've done researches on it, we've done evidences of it, we put together workshops, trainings, made the connections to actually put them in one room, and made sure that the voices of local NGOs, national NGOs, or CSOs are being heard at all levels, the local, the national, the regional, and the global. And INGOs, UN, governments, national, local NGOs, and CBOs have a shared responsibility to find new ways of increasing the legitimacy of policies and practice through realizing local power, agency, and participation. And I'll end with saying this is going to require adaptation, collaboration, and rediscovering the roles to support building this local action. And that's a little bit about where we're at, and I'll hand over back to you. Over.
Thank you, Stephanie. Humayun, please, you have the floor. Can you hear us, Humayun? You may be muted. Humayun, you have the floor to introduce yourself if you can hear us.
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you perfectly. Would you like to introduce yourself and your work?
Sure, sure.
Great, thank you.
Hello to all. Please accept my hello as good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zones. Thank you for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be with such dedicated participants. I'm Humayun Nasiri. In the last years of my university, I began my career with MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, in Afghanistan. And in recent years, I went to South Sudan and Jordan for MSF humanitarian missions as expatriate. At present, I have no job, but I will start working again as soon as my current circumstances and atmosphere around allow me. It hasn't happened since August of 2021, but I'm optimistic. So as I don't work at present, I will focus on what I did. So it is more in relation to my experience. As humanitarian workers, we work in environments which have been affected or being affected by man-made disasters. We work where people are in acute needs of medical, humanitarian assistance. And of course, we work where local population is in severe need of assistance due to challenges caused by natural disasters. In the environment we work, they are often insecure, and we work with our resources which are available for us on the spot. That's how we work. as localization is one of the most important elements of today's humanitarian assistance. So in my experience, improving the strength of local organizations is significant in humanitarian response, as they are located at the front line of the crisis. Therefore, local organizations are better placed, I would say, to respond. So they can do the work faster because they have greater knowledge of the needs. To work together with local organizations, we achieve more. On one hand, the methods of localization is, let's say, if a relevant funding agency provides fund to a national or local responder, they will be able to act timely and inexpensively, especially in emergencies and of course in unexpected disasters. They can also reach the needs, the needy people directly, but this is not enough. In such situations, we need to go further to change things. In my opinion, there are a few key points to consider for localization.
Humayun, I'm going to stop you right there because we're going to actually lead into that conversation now, if you don't mind. So
okay.
I'm going to open the floor with just actually taking a step back, because each of you has spoken about localization, has mentioned the word localization. But we've also learned from the research and from many interviews that localization may mean different things to different agencies, has different priorities, it may be implemented in different ways, and even utilized in a policy perspective in different ways. So we don't need to do sort of the ground zero of what is localization, but I do want to get to the question of, really from your experiences, how has the humanitarian system contributed to, enabled or hindered support or engagement, meaningful engagement with local actors? Because I think that's really the heart of the question, regardless of what localization is defined as agency per agency. So I want to start there and then maybe go with Esther and Stephanie now and go back to Humayun as well. So let's hear your thoughts maybe on that first point.
Yes, thank you, Anaid. I will first of all say that there have been partnerships between international non-governmental INGOs and local NGOs, yes. And these have yielded positive results, yes, but at what cost? And here I would say there have been some challenges associated to all of that. And I would say the first challenge is a systemic reliance on international bodies or organizations to declare a humanitarian crisis in a local context. It will seem, unless the international body accepts that a crisis has reached humanitarian level, such a crisis will not be given visibility or attention by the humanitarian community. This reliance for validation from international body itself dilutes the work and appreciation of the authenticity of information from local actors. A glaring example is the Anglophone crisis, which is rocking our two restive regions in Cameroon, which was only given attention in 2019, a little bit of attention in 2019, after I first testified about it in the UN Security Council Area Formula meeting. Similarly, it was also after the NRC declared the Anglophone crisis as the most neglected in 2018, 2019, 2020, that greater funding from the international community was directed to Cameroon. But then many had died and the crisis was already deadly and escalated beyond control. A second challenge or barrier is the assumed lack of agency by the local actors. Most NGOs consider that local actors lack agencies and know-how unless they obtain UN accredited diplomas or certificate. These certificates do not always translate to the local know-how and experience which we have on the field and which many local actors, live on daily basis. For me, the consequence of such is continuous use of internationals at the helm of INGOs, while locals are not put in decision-making positions. This further affects the development of policies and design and implementation of projects on the ground, which often lacks a contextual and cultural feel. Now, thirdly, is the politicizing of humanitarian assistance. INGOs have come to wield great powers and influence that go beyond the humanitarian work they are called to do. Many are bound to work with incumbent governments at times to the detriment of the humanitarian community or sidelining of certain local actors who are not in good standing with government. This is what I have with regards to that. To that question. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Stephanie, would you have points to add on this?
Yes, actually, I think I would break this down in 3 ways in terms of how we're hindering local organizations, and I'll talk about how we're strengthening them. But 3 ways. First, humanitarian architecture. 2 is our type of partnership. And 3 is indirect funding. And I want to go into this a little bit, just a little bit. Obviously, national and local humanitarian actors have been long recognized as central players within the humanitarian responses all across the world, the globe. And we know that the local responses are sometimes they're definitely more cost efficient, they're sustainable, they're perceived to facilitate better operational access, and they lead to stronger networks within the communities. So we see that national NGOs also tend to effectively bridge that humanitarian development nexus that is so difficult oftentimes for international NGOs to grasp, although right now this is the key word at the global level and everyone's bringing it back in, but at the center of the nexus is localization. Now, we as international organization, we recognize, the unique value of national and local NGOs, the diversity, the largely, access issues, the access abilities that they have, but there is a disconnect when it comes to the humanitarian system. And although the localization agenda was one of the key reforms through the Grand Bargain, and now we have a Grand Bargain 2.0, which ends in 2023, but although there was it's that key reform, that all those commitments that are made, still the meaningful and effective participation in the international humanitarian response architecture is insufficient. And we've done researches on access to the HCTs, to the OPAC, to the EDGs, who's the participant, who even knows what that means from the local actors, who has that ability to join. And the humanitarian architecture, the way that it's set up and it feeds globally, is oftentimes it's not inclusive of local actors. And when they are included, even at the basic level, like the cluster level system, okay, so when you will see local actors involved, heavily involved, but are they meaningfully active? Is their voice being heard? And that's the question that's happening. And the majority of the answer is no. And when we spoke to them, it's saying because we don't really know what's going on. There was no induction on how to participate. The overbearing voices of the INGOs keep coming in with all this lingo that we have, and there's a big disconnect there. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, when I say types of partnership, because I'm going to make this real quick, but when you partner as a local NGO with an INGO or the UN agency, most of them treat local and national actors as implementing partners, not as equal partners. We're not splitting the budget. We're not letting you make your design the context. We're giving you the project already designed, okay? And say, hey, please implement 1, 2, 3 for this amount of money, and that's it. So that equitable partnership is not there. And lastly, indirect funding. Donors are not directly funding local organizations enough. Okay, it's all again going through implementing partners, and that's how they're getting their funding directly. So that's another way that we're hindering the response. Over.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Omayun, I want to come back to you with the 3 points that you wanted to share earlier about your 3 reflections on how the international system can support local actors. Are you with us, Omayun? Okay, while we get him reconnected, Luciana, if you might want to check on that. I did want to maybe continue on this conversation, because it seems as though from both of your remarks that the international system is continuing to set the standard, set the bar, whether it's for what does capacity building look like, what is partnership look like, they're setting the standard. So in what ways do you think, if you could give recommendations, do you think that these partnerships could be built in a more meaningful way? You spoke about meaningful partnerships. What does that look like? And what steps can we take to move a little bit closer to that? Either Esther or Stephanie, the floor is open.
Now, what we consider as a meaningful partnership is that we should not be looked upon as an employee-employer relationship. It should be on equal footing, even though we know that the international organizations have all the capacity, all that it takes, than the local organizations. But there should be some level of there should be a scale where where they can consider those with credibility, with proven credibility, to be equal partners just like them. When you go to our communities, when you go to our regions, you see the INGOs. You will see them with a fleet of cars. You will see them with everything that makes life worth living. Why such consideration is not given to the locals? And when you have contracts which are signed, these contracts at times are not flexible. They are not flexible, and they will make it in such a way that they still pull the string at all time. This is not what we consider in partnership. Now, you will tell me about the duty of care. When I'm going to the field with my staff, what is your own level of duty of care? These are the many worries and concerns which we have when it comes to this partnership. Now, when it comes to building inroads, we facilitate access. We go to the communities, we help them, we facilitate access. We carry out scoping missions to help INGOs to accomplish their missions. But some of them, after signing contract with us, it's just a contract for window dressing, because they make us do those things to later on, immediately they have the access, they cancel the contracts, and then they now go at the forefront. They are the ones who now take the lead to be implementing directly in those communities. And the feedback we get at times from the community is that, what's happening? Why are we not seeing you anymore? Why are we seeing but strange faces and so forth? This goes to tell us that partnership between INGOs and local NGOs should follow some certain rules and patterns, that respect the trust and confidence which has been built over the years by the locals in their various communities. These are the type of partnerships that some of us want to see. Now, when this is baffled, And people, because of money, because of huge funding, do as they want and not as we all would like to see it done, then it becomes impossible and even difficult. Why not dialogue? Why not consent? Instead of one imposing on the other, it should be on an equal platform where we sit together and we discuss this partnership. We discuss this partnership based on what is expected of us and based on the local realities. This is how I look at it. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much. Omayun, you might be with us now. Are you with us?
I hear you.
Great.
Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we're just speaking about, in your vision, just some thoughts about how we can move toward more meaningful partnerships between INGOs and local organizations, and maybe speak to particularly questions of humanitarian access and negotiation, for example.
Yeah, I was saying there are a few key points to consider for localization which need action. In my opinion, the first one is local and national organizations need to have access to direct, moderate, and flexible funding by large institutions and aid agencies. Participation of local people affected by the crisis should also be taken into consideration during designing and implementation of crisis response. Partnership with local organizations for better and joint decision making is helpful. And furthermore, capacity building of local and national organizations in an effective and sustainable manner is an element of success. Therefore, we as international organizations need to look at it importantly. And what I have seen, local, national, regional, and international coordination mechanism is a must, and it is required to have. This will enable us for a better participation of local actors in international conferences and policy making events. And that's an important aspect of localization. I think making such a system or empowering it leads to inclusion, diversity, and engagement of all concerned. And of course, national actors and national staff will feel it. Some organizations are doing their activities through, excuse me, their national staff or national partners. What I have noticed and experienced, it means a lot to all, especially to national staff of organizations. They feel they are trusted and their competence and commitment is understood. I can example Afghanistan. I remember at the result of tensions and severe security challenges in Afghanistan in late 90s, a big number of NGOs were forced to leave Afghanistan. In those days, we as MSF, in addition to other programs, we had a tuberculosis program in south of Afghanistan in Ghazni province. And as you know, closing a TB treatment program is impossible to close it at once. It's a long-term process. Our MSF internationals left the country and our national staff continued the activity without any delay. And all the services provided to TB patients were managed by national staff. Syria is another example. I was in Jordan for a humanitarian mission for Syrian refugees residing in northern part of Jordan. One of our projects was within Syria during the conflict, and it was managed by local partners. There were a couple of other NGOs too, who supported local populations through their local colleagues. And it was a challenge, but it was possible. And at present, Afghanistan again is a good example in this context. There are some organizations who didn't stop their activities after collapse of government in August of last year, and it is the national staff and national organizations who do perform their duties and provide assistance to communities in need. If there is still time, for my part, I can focus on the negotiation as you asked. If not, I will come back later.
Yes, I think we'll come back to that in a moment because there are now some questions in the chat from our colleagues joining us, listening in. So there are two particular questions. One is indeed around negotiation and what is the experience and the role of national actors in engagement in humanitarian negotiations, and particularly those working closely with INGOs. What are their experiences? What are the challenges there? The second question, which I'd like to touch on that has come up significantly, is around accountability. One colleague mentioned that there are thousands of organizations in one particular context, some of which have political affiliations. So how do we think about the issue of accountability? How do we talk about this and bring this into the conversation of localization in a way that still maintains our ambitions to have meaningful partnerships? So let's start with the negotiation piece. Stephanie, I'll give you the floor because you haven't responded yet. And then we'll go, Humayun, back to you for negotiation with Esther, and then we'll go to the accountability question.
Sure. I want to, I guess, touch on this with one sentence. We need to ensure that responsibility is shared, okay? And no single entity should be expected to address any of the current shortfalls on their own. And that's the thing that we continuously need to remind ourselves. We always talk about accountability almost in a one-way direction. And of course, there should be accountability measures in place. Of course, there needs to be transparency and trackers and financial systems in place in order for this organization to receive the funds it needs to be required, that's required to move forward. But we put that sometimes in a way that's a barrier without even going there, okay? And that's the issues that we have to remember, that we have to share responsibility. And recently, there's also something at the global level where we always talk about risk sharing rather than risk shifting. We shift the risks to local actors all the time, but are we sharing those risks? Are we willing to share, what are the risks that could happen when they're dealing with people on the ground, with, direct beneficiaries? What are those risks? Are they only the responsibility of that local actor, or are they shared responsibility? And that's something that always comes up. What we do need to do is, in ensuring, a lot of trainings have taken place in strength and capacity strengthening among international actors with national actors on this topics of transparency and how to manage your project and how to manage your budget. But local organizations who have been around, especially in our regions for so long, they're beyond that. It's time to listen to what the local organization needs training in. And most of the time we're talking now at collective advocacy. What does that look like? And of course, I would give a a recommendation to local actors. It's time to partner with other national and local actors. And it's time to have access to a platform and strengthen coordination with other local and national actors. We have to strengthen internally as well, okay? And then we also expand and we're ensuring that we're part of the international system and the global system and so forth. And all of this has to occur parallel ways. Lastly, we need to ensure that the principles of partnership are in all of our work that we do. There are commitments, there are international global commitments. Make sure that we're keeping tabs of this, and that's kind of what's being followed as well. Over.
Great, thank you very much. Esther.
Yes, I will say that the local organizations have been helping the INGOs so much in terms of mediation and when it comes to mediation and negotiation in order to improve access. We have been carrying out scoping missions on behalf of these INGOs. We have been holding advocacy meetings at community level so that the communities will understand the reason for the presence of INGOs in our communities and why they should give their full support to the operations of INGOs. We've been doing lots of mobilizations and sensitization and community dialogue. And when we do this, we all, both the local and the INGOs, successfully carry out our operations and still maintaining the humanitarian principles, and the keeping to impartiality in all what we do within the communities so that we are well perceived by not only the government, but also by the non-state armed groups, so that the objectives of both the locals and the internationals are well understood and they can effectively carry out their mission. This is what we've been doing in aspects of mediation and negotiations. Now, when it comes to issues of ensuring transparency and accountability, I want to doff my hat to Stephanie. She has said it all. I don't think I need to repeat it. What we see and what we suffer, especially in my own context, is the issue of risk shifting and not risk sharing. It is true that the local NGOs needs to have their capacity strengthened in areas of transparency and accountability. But how we go about doing this is what determines the kind of partnership that we see in our partners in international non-governmental organizations. And that's why in my early beginning, when I started, I talked about employer-employee relationship, because what we feel and see at times is the employer-employee relationship in this partnership. Even if you are strengthening my capacity, do not make me feel as if I am a useless somebody. Do not make us think that our organizations don't have what we call the power bargain to give back to you in other ways, because we are giving back to you in other ways. When we do negotiation and mediation, when we do access negotiation for you, that is giving to you in one way what you are giving back to us in terms of capacity strengthening. Now, when you meet us, when you meet some gaps in our structures, in our governance structures, help us improve and strengthen them, making us to understand that we are as important as you also are important. Then it will be meaningful to some of us. But now, when you take it upon yourself, you know, to blame us all the time, put all the risk on us. When things happen, we have, my organization suffer one of such. I think my organization is a good example for that. We suffer one of such, where we gave our all, gave all beautiful results, and the partner took and were publishing and they were brandishing. But because of one single thing, which was a financial weakness realized on the field, not even in the main office, by staff that we employ and whom we had to sack. This became a whole hell, which is following us today because of that. And that partner forgot that they got the results which they wanted because we were good at delivering that. But where there is a small issue, they've all forsook us and blamed, they started playing the blame game and so on. This is why we are saying that we think that it is time for us to rethink partnership when it comes to humanitarian response. It's true, it is true, we have our own limitations, but these limitations could be improved where there is meaningful partnership, where there is partnership which is out for a win-win bargain and not a partnership which is there to kill the local initiative in order for them to emerge. This is what we will not accept. And that's why I'm happy we are talking about this today and that this discussion is going maybe to shape what humanitarian response and partnership should be like when we talk about localization. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. Absolutely. We hope that this will continue to build the discussion in the sector, and particularly in training and giving adequate access to national partners in negotiation trainings, for example, as we've done with HHI to the extent possible. Humayun, we'd love to hear from you about your experiences in negotiation and particularly this issue of risk shifting versus risk sharing, and perhaps sharing some of your experiences working in Afghanistan.
Do you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sorry for the technical issues I'm facing. Okay. Yes, in the humanitarian system, partnership with local actors and humanitarian negotiations are the key needs for our programs to perform well. If I example MSF, in most places in MSF, our relations with local actors have been communication based. And we had, as we had our own fund, independent strategy and resources, so we were most of the time moving forward at the result of communications we had with local partners. And it also depends on the local context, resources, access, type of activity, where to do negotiations and where to do partnership. In the aspect of humanitarian activities, and from my experience, humanitarian negotiation is very dynamic, and it should be dynamic, and it is a process. And I would say it is not straightforward. It doesn't have a fixed format. So in humanitarian context, this negotiation takes place in a variety of places. It can be in a village, a clinic, a hospital, in the office of a governor, with a community representative, simply sitting on the ground, with rebel groups, tribal leaders, religious leaders, and sometimes at the checkpoints, and even front lines. And recently, online meetings have been added to the meeting times I just mentioned. So in general, in the light of humanitarian principles and values, we do humanitarian negotiations with anyone whose role has an influence on the activity and services we provide. Among other aspects, the response of humanitarian negotiation is about building relations, building trust with our counterparts, our stakeholders, and of course our staff. So in any context, international staff are called foreigners who come and go, and they are not part of the long-term landscape. And in addition to that, sometimes our nationality, background, gender, in the image of the organization we work with also play their role in such negotiations. Therefore, we have to have the right person for the respective meeting. For instance, for technical issues, we should have our technical expert in that specific field. The required tools and methods to negotiate professionally and effectively. By such negotiations, we include other actors, local organizations, local communities on one hand, and we can find our way to perform better on the other hand. I can example South Sudan. I was with MSF in South Sudan in 2017. The project I was responsible for had two components: a clinic for IDPs in a camp called Protection of Civilians, and an outreach activity in the rebels controlled area. So we had to cross the front line at least twice a week to bring medical supplies, medications, logistic equipment to a local clinic, which we supported. So each time before crossing the front line, we had to get a road clearance from the authorities, then had to meet commander in the front line to allow us cross the front line. And we also had to coordinate with local actors on the other side of the front line. We had female medical staff with us during these trips. So it was not an easy job, but we managed it. We, to conclude the negotiation part, we did all of these mainly as the result of good communication with all concerned. That's my input.
Thank you very much, Humayun. And I know, Stephanie, you wanted to add a piece on negotiation. So you have the floor, please.
Thank you. So I actually wanted to first let you know that as ICVA, so we're a very big member, okay, consortium network, and one of our members is actually the Center of Competence on Humanitarian Negotiation, so CCHN. And we partner with them frequently, where we bring them to speak to different actors, settings as part of capacity strengthening, but about humanitarian negotiation. Now, there's different levels to negotiation. And I think that's something that once you hear humanitarian negotiation, political, that's the very first thing that comes to your mind. But there's also a professional aspect to it, which is kind of like looking at modalities of operations, standard operating procedures, the question of how you will work. So that professional negotiation within your organization. You have the technical negotiations, which are actually kind of factual about what you will do. What kind of reports are we going to do? Some of the logistical negotiations, some of that technical conversations that we need to have. And of course, obviously, on the top of it is the political negotiation, which will question the identity of the organization. You have to be clear on your identity, your values, the principles, who you are and why you are there. And that's when it comes to the negotiation that we always say to local and international actors. I mean, is it different Of course, it depends on the country you're in, the context that you're talking about. Are we negotiating with state actors? Are we negotiating with non-state actors? Are we negotiating with, I mean, till now, there's questions, most recently in Lebanon, okay? We had a question about organization. It's an international, very large organization that's saying we are still internally figuring out how we're going to deal with this de facto armed groups that are coming out. Okay, so they were asking us kind of for tips, but they had to ask themselves, are we going to be including them in negotiations or not? Well, in some areas, there's no choice but to include them. And it depends on, again, that country and the way that you work with. So I thought I'd just share that, but there's so much information out there and you can look them up. It's CCHN that shares a lot of information on this as well. Over.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks. And unfortunately, we're getting to time already. It was a very dynamic conversation, but what I do want to just pick up on something that was said in the introduction, which is this sort of idea of the grand bargain 2.0. And maybe as a final thought from everyone, just 2 minutes, I know it's too short, but just some closing reflections on, we have this 2.0 in policy, but in practice, like where is this idea of localization going, right? And where do you see this now heading in a new sort of chapter, if I may? So Esther, I'd like to give you the floor for your 2-minute closing reflections, Omayun, and then Stephanie, please.
Oh, thank you. Anaid, where is localization going? I will say that localization needs to be hyper-localized. INGOs need to further localize down to the level of national NGOs and community-based organizations. They need to prioritize the local NGOs who are known and trusted by their people to work in collaboration, that's partnership with them, while allowing us, the locals, to lead actions in the field. I will also say that localization has to be further contextualized, not just in terms of geography or scale, but more in terms of disaggregated, related gender, ethnicity, educational background, and other socio-cultural variables. I think it is time, as I said in the beginning, for us to rethink humanitarian response, for us to rethink our strategies, and then to better localize. It is time to find new pathways for localization, better collaboration, better partnership, better synergy for the satisfaction of us all, is what I'll say. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Esther. Omayun,
Yes.
your closing reflections, please.
Yes. Local actors know local politics, local culture, geography, immediate and long-term needs. They know more than those who come from far away with written reports based on their perspective. I'm not saying it's not the right way, but to combine understanding and decision-making process in terms of providing assistance, both by international organizations and local partners, is going to produce a good quality of services. So the role of local actors is immense, and they can play the role of a bridge between local communities and the organizations which intend to implement a humanitarian program or a project, especially in a complex environment and dangerous places. And local organizations are the actors who can also recommend needs and introduce the places which are forgotten or not assessed. So in this approach, coordination meetings, cluster and sectorial meetings are essential to be held. This helps us to enrich our knowledge from different perspectives. And it also avoids activity duplications and makes us understand what, where, and who is doing similar or other type of humanitarian programs. My input.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Humayun. And Stephanie, final.
Yeah. Final remarks. I mean, Grand Bargain 2.0 is obviously, you know, it's definitely an enhanced from the first Grand Bargain, and I think we still have a long way to go. It does end in 2023, and we don't know yet what is the next step. But essentially, it is enabling the fact that we need greater support is provided for leadership, delivery, and capacity of local responders, and participation of affected communities in addressing humanitarian needs. And I would recommend to everyone, just to pitch another resource out there, ICVA has a paper on Grand Bargain 2.0 explained. So it's kind of a very, very shortcutting all the top of what has changed between the old Grand Bargain, the new Grand Bargain, how we're doing it. So it's a very nice read and it's very smooth. With that said, last remarks. Responsibility is shared. By localization is going nowhere. And localization is not a threat to international organization. And that is something that we have to keep in mind. It is not a threat to international organizations. The more, the merrier, who can help. We want people on the ground. We want to make sure that needs are met, emergency needs, development needs, long-term needs, peacekeeping missions. There's room for all of these actors and players in place. But local actors and localization, it's not just a trend. It's been here for so long, and we're taking more and more efforts to actually make sure that it is a part of our plans. It's mainstreamed. It's no longer a standalone topic. So there's so much to do when it comes to localization, but all actors should have accountable measures in place, should think of sustainability, okay, should have responsibility, shared responsibility, and make sure those risks are shared as well. And I wish the best on all, and hopefully we can continue this conversation in the future. Thank you.
With pleasure. Yes. Thank you so much to our panelists, Stephanie, Esther, Humayun, for being with us today, for contributing to this really important conversation.
Thanks for you.
Yes, and particularly for sharing your personal experiences, because I think this is incredibly important as we continue the conversation. I'd like to just as well not forget to mention our team at HHI ENP, the Executive Negotiation Project, making this webinar possible, and Luciana, who's here behind the scenes. And really, thank you all for joining us. We remain available for continuing the discussion and looking forward to seeing you at a next conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting us to share